When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to discuss why Bloodraven was allowed to keep Dark Sister after being exiled really to the Wall. Why was the sword not, taken by Aegon V, or why was it never really recovered? Nobody went to go get it from Bloodraven later on. What really occurred there? I think there's three main reasons as to why Dark Sister never made its way back to the Targaryen possession at King's Landing, and or why it was allowed to go with Bloodraven. So let's take a look at the time period right now and where we are when Bloodraven gets sent to the Wall. So at this point, Aegon V is really the only male claimant that's really relevant at this point. It was offered to Aemon, but again, Aemon has his own vows. He's not going to become king or anything like that, and he's actually going to go to the Wall with Bloodraven. So at this point, who would wield Dark Sister? That's your first question to answer. Who would wield it? Would it be Aegon V himself? Well, as we see with the history of Dark Sister is never really wielded outside of by Visenya and Maegor by someone that's on the throne. It's usually given to the line that's like the brother to the king type vibe, or something along that line. Or it's given to the second claimant to the throne, whatever you want to see, whatever you want to say with that idea. And it's also usually given to somebody who's really skilled with fighting. For instance, the last person before Bloodraven that had it was Aemon the Dragon Knight, one of the most famous knights in Westeros. So right away, when you're just looking at the history of this, Aegon doesn't really have anybody to give it to outside of if he's just going to wield it himself. And two, the other part of this I think is really interesting is you think about what's the rationale of just taking the sword from Bloodraven right now. He's still going to do a very honorable thing, and Bloodraven himself might have even realized he needed to go to the Wall because of things that could have been going on with the Three-Eyed Crow, all that stuff. And so, you have Aemon, you have Bloodraven go to the Wall. And in a lot of ways, if you're Aegon, you might be thinking, well, it's actually probably safe with them. You have not only your brother there that could always get the sword when Bloodraven dies, but you also then have Bloodraven there who, albeit he's done some crimes, executing a black fire when he was given safe passage, safe conduct, very bad thing to do. And so I believe that Aegon probably thought, well, whenever, one of my sons, comes of age, or when I have kids, they can get the sword eventually when Bloodraven dies or down the road. Well, that becomes your next ripple. Aegon has a ton of issues with his own reign. Not only do we see another Blackfire rebellion, but we also see that his kids don't exactly follow what he wants them to do. They take after their father and they break their betrothals. His first son, Duncan the Small, somebody that disobeyed his father and ends up marrying Jenny of Oldstones, which basically is him forsaking his claim. I don't think Aegon would have been necessarily happy with him to give him Dark Sister. Also, again, Duncan would have been the heir to the throne, so you don't necessarily give Dark Sister usually to the person coming to the throne. His next son, Jaehaerys II, is very similar how he's described to Aenys in terms of his physical condition. The difference is Jaehaerys II was described as a very clever man, albeit weak physically. Another person you would not have given Dark Sister to. You then get to his third son, and his third son is the most likely he would have thought about maybe giving a Dark Sister to in Daeron. But Daeron actually dies a year before Bloodraven goes missing. So again, it could have been an easy idea of let's just wait till Bloodraven dies and then we'll get the sword back. That all makes sense. I think that Aegon would have had way bigger issues going on. It is even more exemplified when it seems like Aegon tried to bring the dragons back and Summerhall happens, wiping out a lot of the Targaryens. So all of that, in my opinion, makes sense. There's just too many other things going on in Aegon's reign to really care about Dark Sister at that point when it was safe with Aemon and also Bloodraven. And two, he didn't really have anybody to give it to, in my opinion. Some people may argue, well, he could have given it to Dunk, who was in his Kingsguard at this point. Dunk, unfortunately, is not related to Aegon. He's not part of the royal Targaryen family, and so that just doesn't make sense given the tradition and the history of Dark Sister. And you got to remember, Aegon would have grown up hearing all the stories of the first Blackfire Rebellion. There's even an idea how Aemon and Aegon would even do this little game, setting up the Redgrass field and all of that stuff. It very much, he would have grown up understanding the importance of swords, their values, their history, and how, those are really important. Blackfire, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, has now given claim to this other branch of Targaryen blood. And so he would have realized that. And so when it gets to finally when Bloodraven actually, disappears, well, what do, right? The sword is gone missing north of the wall. I think the even more interesting thing would be, okay, if Bloodraven knew he wasn't coming back to the wall and stuff, why wouldn't he leave Dark Sister with Aemon? Or if he went missing north of the wall, is it because it actually was a surprise? That he didn't really know that he would never come back? Maybe a same story of like Bran, for instance, where Bloodraven might have been misled to going to that cave or going north of the wall and disappearing and actually intended to come back at some point. Or maybe he just kept the sword because he knew someone like Mira or Hodor would eventually need to use it in the main story. Whatever you want to say, the Targaryens would still probably inquire about the sword. And even Aemon there would have asked questions about that. And again, I think people would have gone looking for the sword to try and appease the Targaryen family and all that stuff. It's a really valuable sword being Valyrian steel. You know how rare those are in Westeros, but you come up short. And that is kind of where I come to it. I think the reason that Bloodraven was allowed to keep the sword for so long was, one, there really wasn't anybody to give it to. Two, I think it was pretty safe, and you could just wait till Bloodraven died to take the sword. Another thing is, like I talked about, Aegon had bigger things that he was dealing with, his own turmoil with his family, and trying to please the higher lords and the small folk and all this stuff. He really wasn't worried with Dark Sister at this point, more than likely. And so I think that Bloodraven was just allowed to keep the sword. But what do you guys think about Dark Sister, and what do you think about its future if we do ever see the Winds of Winter? George's last couple updates have not made a positive note on that, but I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the history and the gray area of the sword, Dark Sister. Bye, guys.